Yeah, as a junior, I played 1 year in 1967 in the under-16s, and then I played 2 games. No, 1 game in '67, 2 games in '68, and then in '69 I joined Brothers for the whole year in under-18. It was an honour to captain that side, and we went on to win the premiership against a red-hot East team at the time that had won just about every age group all the way through. And we had obviously a very good side ourselves that included Rod Hauser, who went on to play for the Wallabies at halfback. So we had a very good footy team, and we only lost 1 game all year that year, and I scored a try over the dead ball line. So they've never let me forget it over all those years, but we got the big one. Well, it's interesting. I just come out of under-18 the year before, so we're talking about 1970. And I got picked in a trial match, a pre-season trial, and it was a night game against Souths. And in that time, they brought 4 Fijians over. It was the big news in Brisbane Rugby League in 1970 with the 4 Fijians. And I remember I was just a kid playing against some of these really hard guys. There's a guy Vola Vola and Batabasaga and Eamon Guta Gutawai and Moo Nabuta, and they were pretty tough guys. And anyway, that was a pre-season, and then I obviously made my debut that year as well in the fixtures. But in the second game I played against Valleys, I actually broke my collarbone, so I was out for quite an extended period of time. But when I look back, I was 11 stone 7 in the front row as a young 19-year-old. So I was lucky it was only my collarbone I broke, I think. The guy I looked up to, I think, the most undoubtedly was Peter Gallagher. Now, Peter Gallagher was captain of Brothers here in the late '60s, so I was a young fella playing in the juniors. Pedro, as he was fondly called, captained Australia, went on those 2 Kangaroo Tour in '68, I think, which is what he retired off the back of. Won 2 premierships with Brothers in '67, I think was his last year with Brothers, but they went on and win another premiership in '68. So Peter Gallagher, I think, was the guy that I looked up to more than anything. And I remember he coached me. There used to be a Trades and Labour Cup representative team, which was like an under-20s Brisbane team that played Ipswich Trades and Labour side, and also Toowoomba, like a junior Bulimba Cup. And Pedro coached us that year, and I always had a lot of time for him and saw him regularly during my playing career, and he was a great mentor. Toughest opponent. As I say, there was a couple of Fijians we played against, and they were as hard as rocks. Vola Vola, I remember he had the reputation of writing a car off, which is not unusual, but he was a pedestrian at the time. The car hit him and deflected into a post, so he was a pretty hard man, Vola Vola. And he played for South, and Greg Vivas played there, and I played a lot of rep football with Greg as well. Greg went on to captain Australia, and he captained South. He was a really tough nut, Greg. He gave it everything, and I would say from a toughness point of view, he was my era and as tough as they come. Warrington, what an experience that was for me. I was fortunate enough to be selected as a Player of the Year out of the Brisbane Rugby League in 1973. So that's almost 40 years ago to the day that I got selected. And the prize then was to go over to Warrington and play a season in Warrington, which was obviously then our off-season. The Pommies now overlap our season, but in those days they played in their winter. John Grant, who's the Australian Rugby League Commissioner, he went the year before I did. Jerry Fitzpatrick, who unfortunately recently passed away, he also went. Peter Connell went in different years. Darryl Broman got picked one stage, and unfortunately the Warrington allegiance had stopped by then, so they sent him to Hong Kong for 2 weeks, which was a shame because he would have been sensational over there. But I had a fantastic time in Warrington. I spent 7 months over there, walked into just one hell of a footy team. We hardly lost a game when I was there. The great Alex Murphy was captain coach. They had some of the great Pommy forwards at the time, Dave Chisnell and Ashcroft, the hooker, Kevin Ashcroft, John Bevan was a dual international winger, was one hell of a footy team, and we won the Challenge Cup final at Wembley, which was an experience of a lifetime, obviously. A number of other trophies, so it was very, very special, and I came back in about May of that year to then continue my career with Brothers. '74 grand final, that was a sad day for me because I didn't play in it. Brothers had made the grand final. I'd played through the whole season. I'd come back from England after my season in England, came back in May, and we had a really good run into the semis. Obviously a very good side, coached by Paul Broughton, who'd come up from Sydney. He was a disciple of Jack Gibson, and unfortunately I injured my cartilage, injured my knee about 5 weeks before the grand final, and was totally sort of restricted by it, and then amazingly about a week and a half before the grand final, the cartilage just popped back into place, and I thought for a while I'd be able to play. Did some running down here at Court Park, I remember it well leading up to the game, but then it popped back out again, and I had the operation 5 days before the game. Fantastic grand final, albeit it was a trialist grand final, and as I recall, it was raining because I remember sitting on the sideline under an umbrella with trying to keep my plaster cast dry. But Brothers put up a great performance that day. As I recall, went within inches of scoring a try. I think young Bennett, not Wayne Bennett, but one of the Bennett brothers playing for us that day, went so close to scoring. Tony White, who played in that grand final, who passed away soon after in a tragic truck accident. It was a very, very good footy team, and Valley's just got us on with kicks on the day. Oh, fabulous honour to be selected to play for Queensland. I think it was '73 was my first year for Queensland. We didn't start out all that well. In the 3 games that year, we never scored a point, although one of the losses was a creditable 10-0 game, but we never scored a point. But the big turning point in the next year, and I played for another 3 years after that, Barry Muir was appointed as Queensland coach in that era, and Barry was just passionate about Queensland footy. Of course, it was pre-Origin, so we had Queenslanders coming back to play against us. Artie Beetson was one, for example, that came back, and Mark Harris and a number of other guys came back to play against us. But we gave it everything. Those guys were the superheroes, if you like, coming out of Sydney footy. But in '74, after I'd come back from England, I played the next 2 games. So they'd already played 1 while I was in England, and I played 2 in '74. And we drew both of those games. As I recall, we were ahead 13-5 with about 8 minutes to go in one of those matches, and unfortunately conceded it to a 13-all draw. So we were starting to turn the corner a bit, and I mean, State of Origin has been a fantastic concept, but I think there was some great efforts in the late '70s to start to right the ship, and nonetheless in 1975 we won the first game against New South Wales up here at Lang Park. We led quite well with about 20 minutes to go, and that often happened in those days. They were fitter than us. Whether they were necessarily better players, I guess you could debate, but certainly their fitness level often caused us problems at the back end of games, and so we'd won the first one, we were just pipped in the second, and then I'll never forget, we ended up getting rolled 9-8 for the series in the third one at the Sydney Cricket Ground, and I remember thinking I was about to score my first try for Queensland that day, and I did a little inside play with Johnny Lang. Langy was the hooker at the time, only a couple of metres out from the try line because I was never real quick, so I had to run from about that far. And I never forget, Graham Eadie sort of came out of, I don't know where he came from. I've spoken to him about it since then, and just stopped him in tracks. So there was some good efforts by Queensland, I think, in those mid to late '70s where we were starting to fight hard to sort of reinstate some pride. Barry Muir was a key part of that. Greg Vivers, as I say, was tough, and he took it up to them all day. We had some good players. Lou Platts, of course, played for Australia. Struddy played for Australia in that era as well. So that's Ross Strudwick. So I think we were starting to at least stand up. And as we know, State of Origin came in a couple of years later in 1980, and it certainly has righted the ship, especially in recent years. Yeah, one of my greatest honours, of course, was to play for Australia in 1975. It was the first World Series. Up until then, there was basically Test matches. So this was a World Series. There was Wales and England and New Zealand and, of course, Australia. We'd come off a victory against New South Wales, so Queensland got 4 players represented that day. It was my first game for Australia, but unfortunately my last as well. I got injured in that game. I tore my hamstring. I broke my arm the next year and never got another chance. But I look back and think it was the best day of my life, football-wise, but also one of the worst day, all in one. Mixed emotions. We won the game, and I'd done the hamstring. I stayed out there for up to about half time, I think, and I recall putting Lou Platts through a gap from about 55 metres out, and Lou put it down under the sticks. The reality is I couldn't have run 55 millimetres that day, but Lou was beside me to finish it off. So, you know, just a great honour to be selected. Unfortunately, it was a one only.